just wait. Okay, cool. Well, hi everyone. I think I've met some of oh, I go back here. Some of y'all in some previous calls. Um, I so been part of Cafecito for a while. My name is Izhar, and I'm just very thankful to be here to share things. Brenda for asking me to share this topic with you all. And like the title says, I'm going to be sharing today a little bit about the value of design in the world of business. And I think it's a critical topic nowadays with layoffs and trying to find jobs and the industry getting even more competitive. There's a very important aspect of the work we do that sometimes I feel like is lost in the industry, in the conversations. Because we are designers, it is design work, but there's also a business behind what we're doing. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that. It's not all exhaustive. Obviously, it would be kind of touching very lightly. This could be split into a lot more other, I guess you could say, topics. But today I'm going to give in like an overview based on what I've been uncovering and thinking about. And please feel free to drop questions or comments along the way. You can make this interactive. And so I'll share a little bit about me. My name is Izhar Buendia. I'm a designer. I like to say I'm an entrepreneur, have different side, maybe we could say, hustles or businesses going on. And I play music as well. Wish I was a professional musician, but maybe in a couple of years. And then a little bit about my past. I've been working in various types of organizations, from very large ones to smaller startups. You might recognize some of the brands here. It's been really a great honor and opportunity to work with incredible people, and this has really just shown me different aspects of design and how design is considered and valued in these various organizations. And I'll be sharing from my experience in that. So I think the first thing at hand to kind of to ask as we're talking about this is, what is design? Right, like it's used everywhere. We all kind of hear and see. We talked about like, oh, design, that's design nice, from food to politics. We see design in all our space. There's many names for it, and especially when it comes to using it in digital spaces and software. But I think a good way to help create a foundation here is a documentary from 2017. Some of you all saw it. Envision interviewed several design leaders to ask and try to ask them and have them define what is design. So I want to share with you a clip from that.
Art and design are completely different. Art is about making questions. Design is about making solutions. So in art, you can make something that doesn't make any sense, which is okay. In design, you have to make sense.
I really didn't get fascinated with design until I started to learn what it was and what it could actually do.
It's not pixels, it's not the nitty-gritty and using Photoshop or whatever tool you want. It's the act of intentionally solving problems.
I think of design as like a bridge, that like on one side you have something very complex, could be a technology, and on the other side you have a person. Design is that thin layer that connects complexity to meaning.
The biggest challenge designers are facing right now is the fact that they're designing a lot of things that are new, that have not been done before, in organizations that are evolving and changing, for audiences that are evolving and changing.
It's a time where there's a ton of competition, and that raises the stakes for the better experience.
We will have to learn to adapt and think about creating experiences in new ways.
More and more companies are really valuing the end-to-end experience.
It's less about, hey, I'm going to create a new app. I looked around and myself and other designers realized that there's opportunity to make a difference in people's lives.
A lot of the really disruptive companies chose not to play by the rules of a particular industry.
Now that we realize the importance of design, now it's like, you gotta show the results.
Highly recommend watching the okay, watching the documentary. It should be free online. Um, but essentially, what the little trailer there is trying to explain, just like what Steve Jobs in this quote here is saying, that design is more than what it looks. It's really about really going deeper and finding how things work and finding solutions around that. So again, I want to make sure, I know a lot of us here do design, but just to kind of further define this, an example that is used a lot, as you all know, is like you design a product, it works, it's functional. But when you're designing an experience, it's aligning it with how the user is experiencing the product itself. And this applies not only to the physical world, but also the digital world. An example of that is Apple and how seamlessly you can move between devices and everything's connected really well. What's interesting is this field is very young, and it's not that as mature as sometimes we think. Here's an interesting chart here from the 1950s to now, and projected to where it's going in 2050. It's only been like 60 years. And when I thought about where I got my first design job, I was like, wow, it was like 10,000, 15,000 kind of jobs in the world or professionals of UX. And within like 10, 15 years, it's more than doubled. Now it's like over 1 million. So it's definitely grown, and there's a reason for that, that people are starting to see the value of what design is bringing to the table. And that leads me to another fact about this, or data point, which is the salaries around UX. I know they vary based on location and they vary based on roles, but some of these are quite impressive. And even as an entry level, I remember back then, I don't think I was getting paid that well. It was still more than I thought I would ever get. And so it really kind of makes me question, like, why is this role or design so, I guess you could say, lucrative when it comes to working in product and digital products? And really it comes down to, like my girl Cardi B says, money. And it's money on both sides. Really, businesses, organizations seeing how design can drive business outcomes and how you humanizing tech really drives those outcomes. But it's also money, like, on the folks who are working on this and having that specialty. They also receive that money. Now, unfortunately, as we all have seen, the industry has been impacted by the economy or just by changes in the industry. And I feel like organizations are starting to take a more critical look at how design is really pushing that the business outcomes even further. And even you can see that in UX openings, how those have fallen in the past year. And I'm hearing that it might come up this coming year and next year, so I'm hopeful for that. But it's been an interesting kind of trend here. And then in addition to this, like, the expectations for people and jobs are just out of this world. I found this funny tweet because it's so true. It's like, oh, I'm hiring entry level, but I'm expecting like this person to just have all this experience. So I feel like this leads to this point of, like, how do we as designers still stand out and really kind of drive what we've been talking about for ages, which is we drive value, right? We help the business move forward. And it seems like we're at an inflection point where we need to even further communicate that and embed that in our work. So how do we change that mindset? How do we think of design from a business perspective? And so one way I thought of doing this is, like, what if we just go back in history and really look at the basics of how does design really help different societies, or historically different moments of innovation. Obviously, when I say that, I think we think of these old computers, but actually, why don't we go way back to ancient Chinese philosophy, back in 500 BC, when there was this philosophy around, or a lot of religions around harmony. And one of them is Taoism. And Taoism is about holding this balance in the universe, and kind of creating a space where you have balance between negative energy and positive energy. And balancing that really provides this positive, they call it chi, right, through your life. And this started impacting all areas of life, including your physical space. And then that led to a new type of form or thought that was called feng shui. And that's what we know that as today, feng shui, which is really how you spatially arrange objects and things in your environment and to really impact the flow of the energy, flow of people and whatnot. Almost sounds like how you lay out a page, right, with design and UI. What's interesting though is that this was a more of a philosophy, a thinking, a thought. There's not really a tool to help people move, like I guess apply this practically. Until there was a tool that came out that was called the Bagua, which is a map that really you can place your home against and then tells you where these kind of areas of energies live or how, and then within there you set up your space so it can balance, you have balance of energy so you can have more wealth or improve your relationships, whatnot. And what's interesting, there are consultants who focus on this, and they charge up to $400 an hour. So here I'm seeing an example from even old days how design was being used to really help drive a solution based off a thought, a problem, which is how do we encourage more balance in our space? And so this tool of like diagram helped with that. Let's continue. Moving more in history, you see in ancient Greece, there's evidence as they started building technologies and whatnot, evidence of people designing tools and their workplaces based on ergonomic principles. And when I say ergonomics, it's the discipline of how people interact with objects within their spaces. And if you go really kind of look into the history around this, you'll see like there's documents around how they were doing this. Actually, the famous philosopher Hippocrates left written literature about how medical people should be interacting with patients and tools and the space around them. And so here's like an excerpt of one of his articles where or published articles where he was saying how the position of the light in conjunction to where the surgeon is standing and the patient is sitting and the shading, and kind of taking into consideration all that space. So again, you start seeing how design is trying to provide solutions for problems people face, which is here an example of is how do we better operate people in medical situations. Moving on, cannot leave the Industrial Revolution now when cars and or factories were huge. And then during this era, there was so much thought of like, how do we make this more efficient and how do we build this more efficient? And that led to really kind of thinking of, again, design around the space and the production that's happening within that space. So a lot of research on like where the worker stands in relation to the machines, in relation to what comes next. So a lot of flow design that came out of this era. There's a lot of research or literature around. And then more recent, the spread of personal computers. It became at the beginning of this era, it was very, you could say, scientific, not so easy to use. But as it started getting more, the problems that it could solve were becoming more clear. There was a need to leverage design to help solve the cumbersome of the computers, which is what led to improving the GUIs, as we saw. There's the first Apple GUI, and just really adding more of a visual to the really computer terminal. And this really changed the game. And again, another example of how design is being used to help solve a problem, which is in this aspect is like make computers just easier for everyone to use so they can solve their own problems like adding in the calculator, or maybe it's just boredom playing a game. So I'm kind of wanting to like kind of conclude this with saying something that was in the video, which is art is about making questions, which we still use that in design. I think it's very critical to pose questions as we're designing. But ultimately, when we're thinking of design within the space of a product, a business, it's about making solutions. And so this kind of led me to another question, which was, what are the solutions that businesses need, right? What kind of things would they want to have design help with? And so one, Jared Spool, he's a known designer and kind of big influencer in the space of design, has written some great articles, and I think he even has like a school or nonprofit around this. I saw a quote from him or a tweet, and I thought it was very, very insightful. And here he's saying that there are 5 things executives care about: increasing revenues, decreasing cost, increasing new businesses market share, increasing revenue from existing customers, increasing shareholder value. And he says here, design leaders know how to frame their team's efforts as helping these priorities. And it's so true. Anyone who starts moving in these organizations and starts, or even interviewing, or kind of wanting to move up in the career, these are key things that designers keep in mind, or need to keep in mind, to really drive that impact. So to just kind of double check, or kind of give you an example of what does this mean, just give you some kind of tangible examples, because they're like this, like, what does increased revenue, how does that relate to design? I've provided some, I'm going to share some 3 use cases around that. And then after that, I'll give some tips on like, okay, then how do we really apply that? And hopefully this idea of like seeing design as a business decision is a bit more clear. So the first case study here, it's Airbnb. And in 2021, they saw an increase of guest demand. COVID really drove that up. But there was a lack of hosts, at least to what Airbnb wanted their host inventory to be at. So their need was, let's make hosting mainstream. How do we get everyone thinking about hosting? Like, hosting can be for anyone. It doesn't have to be for someone who wants to make a business out of it. It could be anyone who has a home, a room. And so they spent some time thinking about this, and design proposed a couple of options. They said, why don't we show the value proposition of what hosting can do to you? So you come in on the consumer experience and you're like, oh, by the way, did you know where you live? You can make this much money. It's like, whoa. Then they provide a human connection. It's about a community. Let's connect you with someone and let them show you, what they did, how they made it work. And then they make it super easy, very clear, 3 steps, so you can just put your place on the system or on the website, and then you can start earning this money. Really simplifying that experience is what they did. The results were actually quite impressive. They had, I think within a year, they had over 1 million new hosts. So there was a growth of 16%, and their revenue grew very, very steadily. So here again, an example of how the design team had a focus of improving that experience of onboarding new hosts. But really what was the driving factor was, we need to increase revenue for the company. The second case study here is around General Electric. In 2010, it was the 14th largest software developer. I actually worked at General Electric, and they had software that managed some pretty cool things like plane engines or power plants, like oils rigs out in the ocean. And so they had all this software, but it was all done within small little teams, and there was a lot of one-offs. And that was creating redundancy in the work and really bringing down efficiency. So there was a business need on like, hey, this is costing us a lot of money. How do we bring this cost down so that we can innovate in other areas? So we hired a bunch of designers, leadership of design, and they came out with this, they called it the UX Central, or what was it like? It was called the Center of UX Excellence. And essentially it was these design standards and guidelines, somewhat like a design system, but also even broader, kind of seeping into the branding side as well. And the results of this work of the team, and there's a lot of, I would say, campaigning and communication and spreading of documentation and whatnot, had a huge impact on the company. Based on the results I found online, there was 100% increase in productivity across development teams. And there's an estimate that $30 million were saved in operational costs. Again, the design behind this, it's about helping, have a consistent visual language, right? So it's very clear from a design perspective, the value, but from a business standpoint is that drives improvement to the business. Finally, Uber is another example here of, I would say, of increasing market share. So if you remember in 2015, Uber became one of the most valuable startups in the world. And they were valued quite high. And they were still very ambitious. And they're like, we need to grow into emerging markets. So let's think smaller, like South American cities or Asian cities and whatnot. The problem was that these markets might not have the latest technology, might not have the latest payment systems in place. And so that was a challenge of like, how do we do this? So they brought in research and they prototype different options and would literally go into the town and try it out, come back and kind of come up with their prototype and then go back out. It's actually a quite cool case study around how they got to this final solution, which was they realized people they pay a lot through cell phones or cash. And so they created a way to track payments if people paid with cash. So a very interesting exploration way that they were able to capture the market without having to really fully use the technology that is found like in the US. From my perspective, seems a little like, oh wow, it's very manual, right? But the impact was huge based on that research and actually testing that out. There was a further increase of cities added to Uber, and also countries. And after 2 years, it grew by more than 400 cities based on incorporating researchers and design into their team and product. So just wanted to share a couple of use cases, like what does it mean for design to drive business value? And I know many of you probably know that yes, design at the end of the day drives some value, right? But to even go deeper, how does this even further impact how we should or how we think in design? Like, how is design really a business decision? So I remember when I was getting into the career, into UX, this kind of design thinking process or design process was huge. Like, what's your design process? Your design process in your portfolio, design process. And it's still very big, I would say, in our industry. And that's something we think about when we interview, right? I would say there's a gap here when we talk about design just from this perspective. And the gap is that, yes, we must empathize with our users. We need to define, narrow down, diverge and converge our ideas, make sure there's multiple ideas to get to the right ideas, prototype, be quick and test, yes. But there's other things here that sometimes I feel like as designers, we forget to consider. And that is that we're empathizing with business customers. We are defining based on business objectives. And we are ideating, prototyping, testing, but it's really to drive these business metrics. Ultimately, that's what it is. As designers, as we do this, we know there's a human element, right? We know that, hey, maybe there's another human involved in this type of work. Should we consider them as part of the business customer market? And then when we're defining things, yes, we're ideating different ideas, and they could be not made directly related to the business objective, but then that creates a conversation that maybe that should be a business objective, but ultimately is to drive a business objective. And then any ideas that we're prototyping, designing is ultimately to drive a business metric, right? To drive some sort of conversion or improvement. If it doesn't do that, is it truly solving a problem? And I mentor a lot of designers, and I see a lot of this thinking missing. And even myself, I felt like my work was missing some of this thinking. And it made me, I had to really kind of, it was through trial and error and just really kind of spending more time with talking with leadership and understanding that design is a decision the business makes to help them drive a specific outcome, as we saw earlier, what some of those were. So I think you might think, or I for sure I have, it's like, okay, how do I even think like this? Because I've spent this incredible time, a lot of effort to specialize in design, which that's what we get heavily, you know, critiqued on when we're interviewing and we're, you know, proposing. Quality of our craft is still very critical what we do, right? So how do we balance that with this? That's not necessarily always full of, you know, that's not what our role usually is. And so I don't know if you've seen this on TikTok or other places, but I thought it was funny, and I thought kind of made sense here. So Taylor Swift, currently in Sydney this weekend, um, is she's talking to someone from her team, and the team is like, "Yo, this stadium or deck is like a bigger than 767," and she's like, "Oh my god," and then she's like, "What is a 767?" Um, and it's a video, and I thought it was funny, but it's also powerful because you have this young artist, you know, has a huge team around her who are obviously thinking of the business, like, okay, how can we get more people in here? They have all these different things they're taking care of, and she could just be like, okay, but no, as you know, Taylor Swift, she's known to be like a businesswoman. She's gonna pause and be like, hold on, what does that mean? I don't know what that is. And what I was trying to communicate in this portion was having that curiosity around the business is, I think, the goal here. It's putting on that business hat. And that's something I do a lot nowadays. It's like, okay, hold on. Why is this important for the business? I obviously see the reason why design should be included or why this is not good. I mean, but that's a design hat. If I put a business hat, I start seeing things differently. And I'm like, oh, I see what it is. Okay, I need to maybe convince in this perspective, or maybe kind of communicated that this could impact these numbers or whatnot. And so asking questions about like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What is the metrics we're trying to move? Starts kind of building that business acumen. So I wanted to share some examples of what, some things to consider about like, what is this business thinking? So based on my personal experience and what I'm seeing has helped to really drive those outcomes out. And so I want to share that with you also. The first one I would say is get familiar with numbers. I know it sounds terrible, and it's not as exciting, but I would say even the reason why you might get hired or you are hired is there's a number related to that, right? There's a number paying this much for this person, paying for Izhar this much, but it's because we're going to get this much out of him. And because the business needs to move, you know, on and grow. And if we don't do that, no one gets paid. And so what does this mean, get familiar with numbers? Well, one of them is, I would say for sure, revenue numbers. How is the business doing? How has it done? Get familiar with those reports and documents. But also OKRs are related to that and understanding how those like or business objectives or metrics. I would also say find your finance person from your team or from your company, become friends with them and ask them, like, be curious, like, oh, you know, what are you looking at? Where are the numbers? Where are the challenges? Where are you seeing, like, you know, we're spending the most? It's almost like if you know, were budgeting for yourself and you realize, wow, I'm eating too much coffee and I need to go on this trip, right? Next month, I need to cut off my coffee, right? Same thing, like a business has to think like that. And that could impact your ideas of design because you could say, oh no, I had an idea for this, but I'm realizing we're overspending there. So my idea should for sure address that number situation. Like this is not gonna, it's gonna help us spend less or whatnot. So that context of numbers critical. I would say the next thing that would be is super helpful in putting on that business hat would be understanding the business strategy. And this one is a bit more ambiguous. It's taken me a lot of work, I would say, to get more familiar with it. And I feel like I'm still even getting better at it. But a couple things to think about in this area. The first one is the state of the business. And it's something I recently learned. What is the state of your business? Is your business or company organization you're in a growth spurt? You're like, we have to grow fast. Is it like trying to like we need to, you know, get funding? It's about, you know, getting what do you call those folks who investors on board, or are they more like on a maintenance mode where they're like, we're making money, we're good. We now need to make sure we keep making money and maybe do a few risks, but not too much because that money that's coming, it's pretty good. We don't have competition. And so, you know, we want to be careful. That mindset, oh my gosh, has changed how I approach my work and how I even design. Because, you know, and I'll give you an example. If a company is in a maintenance mode where like their money is flowing, the work that's in the, you know, functions and whatever as the product has a good fit. If I come in as a designer and say, let's do this, that takes us away from kind of the core of the function, it's going to make a lot of people nervous. So there needs to be a clear, kind of a clear reason of why this would either add to the existing experience or there's some sort of like business metric or numbers around risk taking and it's clearly aligned to that. But you see how that starts changing how you really strategize your own design. And so super critical as you start wanting to drive more impact with your designs. And then another one is like, I'm in a situation where I think we're at a growth moment in a company. And so when you're in a growth moment, you're like trying to ship really fast and get things out. And the thing is, if you want to spend time doing too much process or too much like, let's say alignment workshops and things like that, it might not fit well because everyone's such a fast-paced environment. So I would need to, for example, I'm like coming up with different ways of how can we quick, but still have alignment, which is super critical, right? So it changes the way I approach the design problem. And then I would say finally on the strategy side, another one, okay, the state of the business. Another area of think about understanding the business strategy is the playbook. How is the business trying to play in the market, right? So the way it helps me is I think of artists, right? So like Beyonce, she started off with you know, going techno music. Now she's going in with country music and she has an agenda, she's playing in a certain way that's going to help her continue being successful, continue to bring people to listen to her, potentially, you know, win awards. Same thing, a business has an angle. How are they trying to play? And understanding, and that's not many times not fully written out, but trying to get that from talking to people and executives, you start seeing that playbook and you're like, oh, I see. And I can see how my designs can really help even further drive that. And then finally, around business strategy is, like I've been talking about, aligning these design outcomes to the business needs. Yeah, really like your designs should be connected to that. I many times see more younger designers not having that connection, and they're getting there because the designs are good, the solution makes sense from a UX standpoint, but like, how does this connect back to the business? Because that's what's going to help your designs be successful. Okay, finally, the selling aspect of it. And is very frustrating. I would say this portion, because you expect that after spending so much effort interviewing and getting into a job, you would think people already value you, like, and know what you're coming and bringing to the table, right? And many times it's not like that. People still see design, especially non-designers, depending on organizations, can see design as pushing pixels, creating things, making things look pretty. And it's a constant battle, I think, that we're still going to continue having about helping people see how design can drive business outcomes. So having this hat of always pitching and saying, like, this is why this is important. This is why this is the challenge. This is the solution, and how the solution is driving the business outcome. It's critical in every conversation, everything you're kind of thinking about when you're presenting to others. Maybe within the design community, right, within your design team, it's not as, I feel like it's a safer space. But as you start going outside of that into your cross-functional partners, this idea of keeping that sales is going to be critical on that business thinking. And it's exhausting. I'll be honest, and that's okay. Sometimes you don't have to do this, and your design should speak for itself. And many times that if you do your designs well, and it communicates that story. But I can see that the designers who really like, stand out are the ones who, in a subtle way, are doing this through their designs, whether it be through their deck of how they're introducing the problem and the solution, or the way they set up their meetings and they strategize how they are proposing the solution with who they talk to. It's all connects back to this idea of selling it. So again, like I usually do door-to-door sales, and there's a process and a way you do this to get people to consider you as a potential like product to buy, right? And it's funny, I've heard that people who start in sales orgs end up becoming executives because it's at the heart of a company, right? Selling, trying people to buy things from your company so your company can survive. And so, you yourself are a company, like your brain, people are paying for that. And so you want the company to continue seeing the value of that. And hopefully they see it. And what happens is they are like, wow, we want more. And then you move up, and then you have to continue selling that new level up of yourself. And then that's going to continue on, which that could be another topic, because that also sounds very exhausting. But, balance is going to be critical here. Okay. To kind of conclude everything, I really like this quote from the CEO of IBM. Not sure if he's still the CEO, but he said, "Good design is good business," and it's something that I've really been kind of thinking a lot about, and really seeing how critical it is nowadays with this competitive landscape, about how there's a reason companies hire designers, and at the end of the day, it's because it's a business decision. And so if we can ourselves as design practitioners put on the hat, I think we can have more control of our destiny, more control of how we can help organizations see our value, and really help us find the jobs we need, and the funding we need for our concerts, right? To see Taylor Swift and Beyonce. Bad Bunny, of course, but I don't know, that's kind of, hopefully, I don't know, people still like Bad Bunny. Okay, well, thanks everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. And I will pause and open it up to questions.